Okay, so we are glad to inform you that we are
Азбука ТБ активиста.
launching a series of practical webinars called ABC of TB activists. On behalf of the TBEC, we welcome you at the first webinar, Communication for Political Changes, launch of MAF-TB, and included the key asks into the political declaration of the UN HLM on tuberculosis. We're going to have these webinars on a regular basis, once in every month and a half or 2 months. And I would like now to give the floor for welcome word to Julia Kolak.
Рада всех вас приветствовать, рада видеть.
Dear colleagues, good afternoon. Glad to see a lot of faces, a lot of names that look really familiar. And I really hope that we will be able to see you online as well. If you are able to turn on your cameras. For me, it is important now that you all understood why you see this damage to building and the flag of Ukraine on the background here, because all our team of the TBEC is in Ukraine now, and for months already, since the 1st of May, we keep getting attacked by rockets and assault drones. And this night also we had another session of that. So while we are here, at some point air raid alarm may hit, and I really hope that we will not lose power supply and internet, and we will be able to complete this webinar as planned. But yeah, really sorry if something goes wrong. You just please take into account the conditions we face. But despite the circumstances, we are really happy to be here with you, and on behalf of the European TB Coalition, I would like to welcome you at our first webinar of the series of webinars that we call ABC of the TB activist. And but until the end of the year, we will present a number of very relevant topics. And at the beginning, we would like to discuss two important issues important in our context and which will depend significantly on the role of the affected communities and civil society. First, we will be speaking about the political declaration of the UN HLM and how the civil society can advance its asks for this document. And we will be discussing also suggestions from the coordination hub, some activities to make our voice stronger and more united before the United Nations high-level meeting. Also, we will present the guidelines for effective communication of the civil society and affected communities with the decision makers and other stakeholders on initiating the launching of MAF-TB. As you know, this framework is the basis for countries meeting their commitments on TB elimination. We speak about that a lot because that's the foundation of it all. And that is why we really need to promote this framework in our countries, like not let it fall into background. Just we need to understand how important it is, and we need to promote it, we need to advance it. And in our guidelines, you will be able to learn. By reading those guidelines, you will be able to learn with whom you need to communicate, how, when, and so on. So I wish you a very good, productive work. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for finding the time. Okay, thank you very much, Julia, for this good welcoming word, for the introduction of the plan for today's meeting, and for your positive attitude. Now, we are moving on, and dear participants, I would like to note here that you can ask questions after the presentations or during the presentations, but in that case, please write your questions in the chat. We will definitely read all your questions in the chat, but before we start with the first presentation, please turn on your cameras so that we could make a beautiful photo of our event.
Хочется всех поименно назвать,
I
поприветствовать.
would like to welcome everyone by the name, and I'm really glad that we can see each other, at least online. Everyone is so beautiful and smiling. Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Приятно всех видеть.
Such a great pleasure to see everyone now.
Ну что, коллеги, спасибо большое, что вы
Okay, colleagues, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to make a photo. We are really happy to see you here. And we're switching to our first presentation of today. Today with us we have Dr. Robin Wade, expert on policy and advocacy for civil society and affected community in the context of preparation to the UN HLM 2023. She will be speaking about the political declaration, about its zero draft, and what we can do, everyone in their respective country. And I would like to remind the speakers to mind the time. So please, Robin, the floor is yours. Robin?
Hello, thank you. I am just turning my interpretation off so it doesn't have two speakers at once for you. All right, hello everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you today. My name is Robin, and I am the Policy and Advocacy Lead with the 2023 TBEC Affected Communities and Civil Society Coordination Hub. The hub is hosted by GFAN, so the Global Fund Advocates Network, and supported by the Stop TB Partnership. And our mandate is all about equipping, mobilizing, connecting, coordinating, and supporting TB activists and advocates around the world to engage meaningfully and effectively throughout the high-level meeting process this year. And so this year is an important year for TB advocacy for many reasons, but the focus of the hub is around the high-level meeting on TB. So high-level meetings happen alongside the United Nations General Assembly each and every year. And the purpose of a high-level meeting is really to refocus global attention on global issues so that we can reinvigorate the political will and the investments and the commitments to action needed to get back on track towards those issues. So this year, we are really happy that there's a high-level meeting on tuberculosis happening, and it provides tons of opportunity for us as advocates to engage vigorously in getting renewed investment and political commitment to action in our countries and also at global levels. All right, next slide, please. All right, so the focus of the hour right now is the language that's coming out in the political declaration of the high-level meeting. And this is what's called the zero draft, so the first draft of the political declaration. The political declaration is essentially the outcome document for the high-level meeting. And what it's meant to do is take stock of the TB crisis, so it's a record keeping document, and also to lay out commitments to actions that member states sign on to. So it also provides an opportunity for renewed commitment and us as advocates to hold our governments accountable to what they commit to in the political declaration. So one of the big focuses of the hour right now is this political declaration and the language that's coming out in it. If we just go to the next slide, you'll see the negotiation schedule for the political declaration. So if you've been following along and engaging in the high-level meeting process already, you would have known that a number of your colleagues, Yulia included, were in New York in early May to participate in what is called the multi-stakeholder hearing on TB. So that moment is a moment for all stakeholders to indicate what they want to see elevated in the political declaration. So that was a key moment for shaping what ended up in the zero draft of the political declaration. And now we're in the negotiation process and phase. So the political declaration first draft came out on May 15th. And now what's happening is member states are reviewing the contents of that draft and feeding back their perspectives on it. And it will go through this negotiation process all the way until probably longer, but they're hoping to end it on June 20th. So right now, the moment of the hour is really getting our reactions as communities into key targets as soon as possible. And key targets are people who have influence over the language that ends up in the political declaration. So that could be ministries of health in your country. It could be ministries of development, ministries of finance. It could be your national TB program leads who are engaging. And it can also be your contacts who are sitting in New York at your permanent UN mission. Next slide, please. So where we're at in the negotiation process is a number of us, if you were following along and engaging, probably last week would have done a lot of work to get our feedback into those key targets I mentioned. And there was a meeting at the UN on the 25th to get initial reactions from member states. And now there's more work being done to refine the language and get ready for the next in-person meeting and negotiation on May 31st. So we, as the Civil Society and Affected Communities Coordination Hub, put out our initial assessment and reactions to the political declaration. And overall, what we saw was that it was really weak and quite lackluster, with lots of fluffy language, lacking specific time-bound targets. I think Luchika said it really well when she said, you know, it's like, I say I want to lose weight, but I'm not saying how much I'm going to lose or by when I'm going to lose it. I'm just going to say maybe one day eventually I'll lose weight. I'm not really sure how, but hopefully it happens. That's kind of the essence of the language that was in the political declaration, which isn't great because we want to have specific time-bound commitments so that we can hold our governments to account. There were only a few operational paragraphs that had specificity in it, although they weren't necessarily accurate or ambitious enough. Some of the big concerns from our perspective and the broader community perspective was that there was no numerical targets for diagnosis, treatment, and prevention, including for children. There were no commitments or mentions of people who were pregnant or lactating, or even adolescents as key and vulnerable populations, and very little explicit recognition of key and vulnerable populations. Little recognition of civil society and affected communities as equal partners, no mentions or commitments to gender responsive TB responses, and it was very weak in terms of commitments and language on rights-based approaches. So we put out this statement that you can see on screen, and I'll share a link to later, as our reaction to the zero draft. And in addition to this statement, we as a community worked together to develop an improved version of the zero draft. So we took the zero draft, which was leaked to us, and put it in a Word document, and all worked together to add track changes and suggestions for how we can strengthen the language in the political declaration in the interest of what we as communities want. And we know what communities want and what needs to be done to end TB. We've got a global plan. We worked together to develop the calls to actions for the Deadly Divide 2.0. The Stop TB Global Partnership consulted all of their stakeholders to develop their key asks document. And I know that lots who engage on the World Health Organization's Civil Society Task Force also did some social listening to figure out what the communities want to see in the political declaration. So we do have a depth of information around what should be seen in that zero draft. And now we're going to be working really hard to get it integrated into the final version of that document, so that our member states are committing to take actual action, and we as a community can hold our governments accountable to something. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm not going to share my screen quite yet, but I will later share my screen and show you the Hub's website and landing page, where you will see this banner, current call for action. And that's where you'll be able to find, as an advocate, what the current advocacy actions and tactics you should or could be taking to engage in the high-level meeting process. So the mandate of the Hub is to develop tools and resources to equip you to take those actions effectively. So you'll be able to find all of that on our landing page, and I'll walk you through what some of those key calls to actions are very shortly and very soon. But just to note that the Hub is operating at a global level. So what we're developing definitely needs to be localized at the regional or the national level by you, the experts in those regions and countries. So whatever we develop, please do read it, review it, and adapt it as you see fit for your purposes. Next slide, please. Okay, I also wanted to mention the other opportunity for impact, not for us to lose sight of. So I said earlier that the moment of the hour is influencing the language and what's in the political declaration document itself. The other really critical way for us as advocates to be engaging in the high-level meeting process is to get our countries to show up with something substantive. So at the high-level meeting, there will be a section that's called the plenary segment, where our member states essentially get 3 minutes each to say something. They can show up and they can just say things we already know, what the state of the TB crisis is in our country, what they're currently doing, or we can work really hard to get them to show up and say something where they're bringing something new to the fight against tuberculosis. That happened in 2018. So the first high-level meeting on TB happened in 2018. And I went and I watched back that recording and listened to every single country say their spiel. And a number of them just said stuff we already know. Very few said something new and brought something to the table. The US, I think, demonstrated some leadership in terms of bringing something new to the table. They launched 2 new initiatives in 2018. They launched a new research and development strategy for TB through their National Institute for Allergies and Infectious Diseases. And then they also launched a TB accelerator program through USAID. So that's the type of thing we want our member states to come to the floor of the high-level meeting with. We want them to come with action and come with new investment in the fight against tuberculosis. So we as advocates can be working hard to figure out what that could be, what makes sense for our countries and how they can show up at the high-level meeting. So next slide, please. I'll just give you an example from Canada. So here in Canada, I also sit on the Stop TB Canada Steering Committee. And in 2018, Canada showed up at the high-level meeting and talked about a new TB elimination strategy for Inuit Nunavut. So that's a regional level TB elimination strategy that was new in 2018. So building off of how Canada showed up in 2018, we as a Stop TB Canada community want to see Canada show up with a national TB elimination strategy to launch and announce at the high-level meeting this year. So you as advocates can be thinking about what makes sense for our countries in terms of how they can show up at the high-level meeting with something new and substantive in the fight against tuberculosis. Next slide. And I think this is where I'm going to share my screen really quick. So if you can stop sharing your screen, I'll just share my screen so I can show you the landing page and how to see what the current calls to actions are for engaging in the high-level meeting process. Okay, so this is the Coordination Hub's landing page. This is where you'll be able to access all new information, all new calls to actions, resources, etc. If you're not already tapped into what's happening, you can join the listserv and stay in the know by just clicking on this and filling in that form. And then this is where you'll see the current calls to action. So number 1 right now is the Zero Draft Influencing Toolkit. So remember how I told you that we worked as a community last week to develop an improved zero draft based on what was leaked to us. This is the type of toolkit that we'll send out to mobilize and get the community engaging in those types of processes. So if you click on this, it tells you very specifically what resources are available for you to make use of at the national or regional level, how to make use of them, how to adapt them, and how to put them to work. So just to show that this landing page exists, and we are updating these calls to actions on a regular basis, because this is a process that's happening quite rapidly, so things are changing fast. So do take a peek here to understand what the next actions you can be taking. So this would be the go-to action for the political draft language influencing. And then the go-to action for starting to think at a national or regional level, what your country should show up with would be this one here. So there's tons of tools and resources for you available on this landing page. You can check out our statement and response there. You can check out key asks for the TB high level meeting here, as well as our TB key asks for the other 2 high level meetings that are happening this year as well, which is universal health coverage and pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response. And I'm going to stop there and hand it back over to you. But any questions, happy to take them later or in the chat.
Робин, спасибо большое за презентацию.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Robin. So now I would like to ask you, if possible, to share in the chat a link to the resource that you demonstrated, to the landing page, just for the sake of convenience, so that our participants can easily find it. Thanks a lot. So we're really thankful to you for presenting and for telling us about the political declaration and describing the process and working with the 0 draft of the political declaration and the process of preparation to the high-level meeting on TB, and the details on the actions needed to include the key asks. And now we will have time for questions and answers. So if you have questions to Robin, you can ask them now. You can raise your hand and ask your questions if you have any, or you can write in the chat. So we can look in the chat what we have if you have any questions. Okay, so we do have questions in the chat.
Are there any AI-based tools that can help with 0 draft political development between different countries and cultures?
So I just responded to that no, not that I'm aware of, Trayan. And I must admit, I'm not the most literate with AI-based tools, but no, I'm not aware of any tool like that being used to support countries.
Спасибо большое. И у нас есть еще один вопрос.
Thank you. And we have another question. And we have another question in the chat, because this process is ongoing and the political declaration, the 0 draft is already ready. So what each of us can do at the country level, and who we need to focus our advocacy on.
Yeah, so the 0 draft is a 0 draft. It's very much in draft form. So between now and the end of the negotiation process, which is meant to be June 20th, there is lots of time and opportunities for us to work to get the 0 draft language improved. So I would say that the main resource is that influencing toolkit that I shared on screen. And the action that everyone should be taking is reaching out to their targets at national level. So that could be, maybe that's your Ministry of Health, or your Ministry of Development, or your Ministry of Finance, or your national TB program, reaching out to anybody who has influence in the political declaration drafting process, and share with them what we as a community want to see reflected in the document. So that would mean sharing with them the key asks that were developed by the Stop TB Partnership and others, or maybe the Deadly Divide calls to action, or maybe you have like a regional specific key asks document. So sharing what the key asks we want as a community reflected in there are, and also perhaps sharing with them an improved version of the 0 draft. So showing them where and how the current version is lacking and suggesting alternative language to strengthen it. So we have those resources ready at a global level, but again, they'll take some work for you to localize them to your context a little bit.
Спасибо большое, Робин. И у нас есть еще один вопрос.
Thank you, Robin. And we have another question from Christina Chelan. I actually do not have a question. I would like to add, in the context of what Robin was sharing, I want to say that in EECA region, we have our key asks. They were developed within the NGO forum in Dushanbe on May 16-18, and many of the participants of this call, they are in the mailing list that we had in the forum. So some participated face-to-face, some participated online. So I think that after this webinar, maybe you could also share this resource. I think that Julia has these key asks, or I can share those key asks so that the countries can use them. And also at this forum, we prepared a Dushanbe statement, which was signed by more than 260 people, and which, together with the TB Europe Coalition, TB People, TB People Ukraine, and Smith Moldova, was sent to the President of the General Assembly, so that the position of the EECA region would be taken into account, and where we are asking for this declaration to be amended in accordance with the 6 key asks that we offer, taking into account our regional specifics. So this is shortly what I wanted to say, and Julia maybe will add something. Yes, thank you. So Julia, you raised your hand, so comment, a question. Yes, colleagues, good afternoon again. Please engage in our discussion so that it's not an internal discussion. So, dear colleagues, I wanted to add to what Christina said. So I have a question to Robin. So there are some regional comments, regional recommendations which were prepared by civil society, but also I know, Robin, that Stop TB, if I'm not mistaken, gave its some also recommendations to the declarations that CSOs can offer to their entities or to their ministries of health or to their missions. Because everyone understands the importance of these events which are going on, but it is difficult to start when you do not clearly understand your role in this process. So now you have described and explained to us what role can be played by everyone, but at the national level, it is important that everyone understand what they can do. So if you have any tips or recommendations, could you share with the participants of our event so that people could take them as a basis and then work at the level of their countries? Because just, coming to the ministry or coming to the NTP and say that we want to engage, that is kind of challenging. There needs to be some entry point, some starting point. So I think that those tips, recommendations prepared by Stop TB, that would be a good basis to start this conversation with the missions and with the NTPs and with the ministries. And it is important, maybe I would like to add for myself, that if you do not have contact with your mission at the UN to include those comments to the declaration, actually it is quite easy to find their contacts in the internet, and you can just contact them because many people there are quite open. We just send emails, not from our countries, but just from other countries, because they need to respond anyway, and it is better to do something than do nothing, because so you can do the same, and the more active we are in these issues, the lower is the chance that this declaration is weak. and the declaration which would not take into account our interests or our asks. So I ask you all to engage in this work. So Robin, can you share any recommendations or tips what to do for CSOs at the country level? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. I think the first starting point is to link up with a coalition, our group of partners who are already doing this type of work. So I'm going to take my example in Canada, right? So I could be an individual advocate and activist and do my own thing, unaware of what's happening around me. Or probably the better approach would be for me to find a network like Stop TB Canada and tap into their expertise, their networks, and the work that they're already doing, so that we at a national level are coordinating and sharing resources and intel where possible. So I would say first, see if there's a local network that's already doing this type of work that you can tap into and that you can engage with and see what they're doing, and then align your efforts in some way, shape, or form, divide and conquer, if that makes sense as well. So it would be probably step one, because I know the likes of TBEC, they're doing tons of this work. A lot of the guidance on actions and tactics that the hub is putting together, TBEC is a great example of taking that and running with it in a regionally localized way. So I would say that if you don't have relationship with targets yet and you want to start building it, I think it's the key essentials document that you're referring to, Yulia, that would be like a good starting point for reaching out to key targets. So that key essentials document, it isn't a track changed version of the zero draft. It's a briefing note version that says, hey, these are the key asks that we had going into the political declaration drafting process. This is where the current draft is lacking in terms of reflecting those key asks in the document, and here's the logic and rationale for why it should be included. So using the key essentials document as a first resource to share with your ministries of health or your NTP managers or whoever you're reaching out to might be step one. And I shared in the chat box a note that says this influencing toolkit could be helpful. If you take a peek at that influencing toolkit, the key essential documents is linked within, and there is some information as to how to reach out to those key targets. And there's even some template emails that you can use and adapt and send out. I also then shared a link to the UN Blue Book. So if you click on that and then select the option for representatives at permanent mission headquarters, and then type in your country, it'll bring up a page that gives you a full list of who's working at that mission and what their role is. So that's where you can find some contact information to reach out to missions.
Коллеги, спасибо большое за такую прекрасную...
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for this great discussion. And I would like to draw your attention to the fact that Robin has shared good links in the chat, where you can find the tools that will be of use for you. And we have one more question from Natalia Shumskaya from Kyrgyzstan. Yes, good afternoon. It's not really a question, but rather a comment. In fact, it was very important to get the resources that we got from the TBEC, from the PAST Center, from the Dushanbe conference. Yeah, well, we used that for ourselves. In particular, we shared some tools with our partners. We had a meeting with them a week ago, and we shared the key messages and tips. Well, something that our colleagues could use then. And of course, we have our own key messages for decision makers in our country. And we chose the delegates to the national mission. It was a transparent process, and now we've prepared letters to the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It's great that our partners, KCV, have started working on that. So we have several sub-grantee partners in the country, and we promote those issues regarding the United Nations High-level meeting. And the roadmap was very much of use when we created the schedule of activities for the nearest time, and we thought what needs to be considered closer to that. The meeting itself in August, for example. So thank you very much for the support we've been enjoying on the regional and global level. Thanks. Thank you very much, Natalia. Thank you for your response and update about the process in your country and your progress. Now, colleagues, I suggest that we now switch to the second presentation, to the second speaker. But if you have questions, please write them down in the chat so that you don't forget them, or please speak up after the second presentation. The second speaker for today is Alexandra Vasilenko, the PR manager of the TBEC. She will tell about the communication for launching the MAF-TB. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Alicia. Dear colleagues, I'm really glad to be able to present the guidelines developed by the TBEC on communication, the guidelines on communication to facilitate initiation and launch of multisectoral accountability framework. First of all, I'd like to thank the representatives of the European Regional Office of the WHO, independent experts, and our good partners in the 5 countries of the ECA region who have shared their experience with us, and I hope that enabled us to prepare a really practical and useful document. As you know, the TBEC is the partner of the European Regional Office of the WHO on initiation and launch of the MAF-TB, and you know we've been working in this field for a few years already, and we have encountered certain barriers. They were different in different countries, and many of them can be overcome through effective communication. And that is how we've come to the idea that these guidelines could really be of use for civil society in their respective countries to support the launch of the MAF-TB. The next slide. Our guidelines have already been published on the website of the TB Europe Coalition. You can use this QR code to access the guidelines and and download it, or you can get the presentation after this webinar and use the link to access the guidelines. So the document is quite simple. It consists of 3 main chapters. The first chapter is the fundamental information about the MAF-TB, about the 4 essential components of this framework. But to get the most detailed information about this framework, you can read other documents, for example, those published by the WHO or the TBEC before, and the links to those materials are given in the document itself. In section 2, we will tell a bit about the theory of communication and link it to the MAF-TB. So we will discuss the main components of a standard communication scheme in the context of our framework. And the third section is the biggest in the guidelines, and it's most practical, the most practical one, where we describe the stages of initiation and launching of the MAF-TB. We describe the necessary communication with the multiple audiences that I will mention a little bit later. The next slide. Before we get to the questions raised in the guidelines, I'd like to remind that the Multisectoral Accountability Framework to accelerate progress to end tuberculosis is used to ensure maximum engagement of all relevant players and sectors in TB response at the country level. It was created by the WHO at the request of the UN member states, and it is based on political prerequisites documented in many international documents. You can see the list on the slide, so that if you're interested, you could read, find some provisions concerning the framework in those documents. And I must say that I'm proud that in our region we have initiated and are launching this framework in 6 ECA countries: Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan. It's not fully functional everywhere, but the work is active in each of those countries. The next slide, please. Just a few words about the basis of the MAF-TB. It's based on the idea that tuberculosis is not just a medical problem, and that the people affected by tuberculosis need different kinds of support beside the medical care. On the slide, you can see the types of the support they need. So they need psychosocial support, they have employment problems, education problems, movement or nutrition. So the list of problems can be different for different people, but the general idea is the same. Tuberculosis is not a purely medical problem, and you cannot beat it, you cannot end tuberculosis only through medical solutions. The next slide, please. The Multisectoral Accountability Framework is based on the concept of social health determinants. These are risk factors affecting a person at different stages. They can be the reason for infection with tuberculosis, or the reason for the progress of the disease, or for treatment interruption. So all the risks related to tuberculosis can be pretty much explained by the social determinants. I will not be speaking about that in detail right now. You will be able to read it on the slide. These are the, well, the most important ones. It's not an exhaustive list, but we need to understand that we work not just with the physiological problem. The next slide, please.
And now the question which I'm sure you're interested in. So what does Multisectoral Accountability Framework has to do with the CSOs or communities? So what do they have in common? Firstly, I want to say that CSOs, communities, and activists, they can and they should play an important role at each stage of implementation of this mechanism in the countries. So actually, civil society representatives can be the drivers of this process. And to make this task easier for you, to make it clearer, we defined in the guidelines how you can communicate at different levels, whether the target audiences that you can access or which make more sense based on the context of your country. So implementation of MAF-TB with active engagement of CSOs and communities can and will ensure comprehensive support of people affected by TB, unhindered access to TB prevention, diagnosis, and other services, reduced stigma and discrimination, which is very important for people with TB, and finally, protection of the rights of people with TB and with affected populations. Next slide, please. At each of the stages of initiation and launch of multisectoral accountability framework, there are some key actions for communities and CSOs that they can perform. Of course, the document describes this in more detail, but we can briefly say that at the stage of creating an enabling environment for MAF-TB initiation, so at this stage when this process has not been initiated in the country, CSOs, they can draw attention of decision makers and stakeholders to the need to launch this mechanism. Also, they can conduct advocacy and communication activities to create an enabling environment for this mechanism to be initiated. So the next important stage is conducting a baseline assessment using the so-called baseline assessment checklist. Here, civil society can be actively engaged in conducting this baseline assessment using Annex 2 to see how communities and CSOs are engaged in the processes of TB response at the country level at all stages. And the third important stage to initiate and launch the mechanism is establishment and or strengthening of the national mechanism for multisectoral coordination and review of the TB response measures. Here it is very good if communities and CSOs engage in creating the so-called roadmap to define the consolidated actions to be implemented in the country by all stakeholders. And it is good if they are engaged directly in implementation of this coordination mechanism and mechanism of review. And next slide. So now let us talk a little bit about communication. So what and how we can do to start this process. So for multisectoral accountability framework, we took the standard communication framework. You can see this framework here. You see that there is the source of communication, so CSOs or TB communities. The target audience, those are decision makers or stakeholders. We will talk more about this component at the next slide. And we are transmitting a message. The messages are defined in the guideline, and we're choosing the convenient and the most optimal communication channel. It is important when we build short-term and long-term communication that we take into account its goal, because any social communication is aimed at changes of either knowledge of the target audience about the topic of our communication, or changing the attitudes, or maybe changing behaviors. So some actions that we want our target audiences to perform. And the next slide, please. So when we talk about our guideline, for each of the stages, we defined the target audiences for CSOs or TB communities to communicate with in other countries. Of course, here it is important to take into account the country context and the communication and relations existing between the communities and CSOs and certain target audiences. But we define here the possible list of target audiences which can influence at the processes of initiating and launching the multisectoral accountability framework. So you will see all this information in the document. I will not go into detail. And next slide, please. So just to remind you, it is very important that when you work on your communication, please pay attention that one of the most important objectives of communication is not just for the key message to be transmitted, but also delivered to the recipient, and what is even more important, received by the target audience. So when we communicate, it is important to think it through. So not just, deliver some communication. It is important to think about it and analyze what the target audience already knows, what competencies it has, etc. Because if you do not take it into account, unfortunately, the message that you transmit, as a minimum, it will not be received and maybe not even delivered. For example, if you communicate with the decision makers, especially those who have high status, we should not hope that if we make a Facebook post, they will see it and our message will be delivered. We need to find a different channel of communication. And the next slide, please. So in our guideline, as I have mentioned, we define 3 stages of initiating and launching a MAF-TB. And for each of the stages, we define the relevant target audiences, also goals of communication for each stage, initiation, as baseline assessment, and launch of the mechanism. And also we define the key barriers that you can face, and because of which a certain stage can not be successful. So to overcome those barriers, we offer certain key messages for each target audience. Also, we offer channels of communication. Of course, you can choose them based on your experience and your capacities, and also calls to action. And it is really important that we do not just say that MAF-TB is very useful, so it is important to implement it, because the target audience can not always understand what they need to do. So we need to formulate a specific call to action. Then we have a much higher chance that the target audience will respond to your call to action, and that we will have the change we are striving for, changes in the knowledge, action, or attitude. And next slide, please. You have seen it already, but I want to show you again. So that's the title page of our publication. Maybe you will see yourself on the photos if you work with us with TB Europe Coalition. Also, you can scan the QR code to have a look at the guideline. Thank you for your attention. I really hope that this document is useful and helpful to you. Thank you. And the next slide. So just a thank you. Thank you, Alexandra, for such an interesting presentation. We understand that communication is a very important component in any process, and I am convinced that after this presentation, our participants of our call today will want to have a look at the guideline, and we will share it with you after we finish our meeting. So, dear colleagues, I would like to invite you to have a discussion now. You can ask your questions, you can write them in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask your questions. I'm sure that Alexandra will be happy to answer your questions. Well, I do not see any hands raised, but we have a question. So what barriers and challenges can there be when promoting the multisectoral accountability framework? Well, as for the challenges and barriers, they are different for each of the stages, and we describe that in our document. Of course, in your experience, you can see something else also. I can give an example of a barrier when we initiate the multisectoral accountability framework. For instance, decision makers and Here we talk usually about some public institutions. They are responsible for it. They can sometimes think that multisectoral accountability framework. He can hear myself. Let us mute participants who are not talking. So decision makers, they sometimes think that implementation of this framework will lead to some substantial financial cost. There, it is not so. So it is very important to understand what barriers we can face to be proactive and to tell decision makers that, you know, this is not relevant, that is not a problem. Like, for instance, there is already a national coordination mechanism. We do not need to create any additional body. We can just use the existing coordinating mechanism to implement the multisectoral accountability framework. So you can see in the document like the barriers for each of the stages. We have described them. Thanks a lot, Alexandra. If our participants have no more questions, no more questions in the chat, then on behalf of TB Europe Coalition, I would like to say a big thank you to all our participants who joined our meeting today. And I would like to say thank you to our speakers for such detailed and useful presentations. And I would like to say thank you to our speakers for keeping the time, because we had perfect timing today. And after our meeting, we will share all the slides to you. We will also share all the useful resources and links and references and the guideline that Alexandra mentioned, prepared by TB Europe Coalition. And we will also inform you about our further webinars of the ABCs of TB Activist series. So we wish you all a good end of the working day and good and productive week. And thank you for being with us.